They topped the charts, stole the show, and then vanished. Dive into the untold stories of 50s, 60s bands that rocked the world and faded away. Find out what happened behind the scenes of these music legends. 50. Creedence Clearwater Revival. CCR was on a meteoric rise with their swamp rock sound, but behind the scenes, trouble was brewing. What went wrong? Creedence Clearwater Revival, or CCR, was made up of brothers John and Tom Fogerty, along with Stu Cook and Doug Clifford. After forming in California in 1959 and playing under various names, including the Blue Velvets and the Gollywogs, the band settled on Creedence Clearwater Revival in 1967 and never looked back. The group's rise to fame was quick, producing hits like Proud Mary and Bad Moon Rising. In 1969, CCR played at the legendary Woodstock Festival, and though the set did not go as planned, it boosted the band's popularity into the early 70s. Ultimately, CCR's tenure as one of the top-selling bands of its time was short-lived. In 1972, the group bitterly split up. Tom Fogerty had left to pursue a solo career the year before, while Cook and Clifford found themselves in an acrimonious conflict with John Fogerty over the band's final album and its future. 49. The Who. The Who were known for their explosive live shows and rock operas, but backstage drama and tragedy threatened to tear them apart. Pete Townshend and John Entwistle met in high school in London and joined a rock group called the Detours, along with Roger Daltrey and later Keith Moon. As the band got going, Townshend developed his playing style, which combined both rhythm and lead guitar, and the band landed gigs and eventually a record deal. They renamed themselves The Who and began touring, playing in the US and gaining a global following. By the end of the 60s, albums like Tommy had cemented their place in the hard rock scene and made them pioneers of rock opera. By the 70s, The Who was beginning to fray, with substance use and the loudness of their performances beginning to take a toll on the bodies of the members. In 1978, the band's bombastic drummer Keith Moon died of an overdose. The remaining band members decided to continue, but the following year, after a trampling incident at one of their concerts in Cincinnati left 11 people dead, the group briefly disbanded. A number of reunion tours followed, along with studio work, even after the death of Entwistle. 48. Lynyrd Skynyrd. Lynyrd Skynyrd brought Southern rock to the mainstream, but a tragic plane crash changed everything. How did the band cope? Lynyrd Skynyrd, along with CCR and the Eagles, forms what I consider the holy triad of Americana bands from the 60s. They had the Southern rock flavor, the rebellious tenor, and the gleefully open-hearted spirit that defined the collective ambitions of that brazen yet vulnerable decade. Lynyrd Skynyrd contributed some of the most quintessential venerated songs to the classic rock canon. Freebird and Simple Man come immediately to mind. They ranked 95 on Rolling Stone magazine's list of the 100 best bands of all time, and their untimely demise in a fiery plane crash is the tragic stuff of rock folklore. There were 20 survivors, some of whom were critically injured. The group disbanded. 47. Yes. Yes, a progressive rock powerhouse, captivated audiences with their intricate soundscapes, but their success was marred by constant lineup changes. British progressive supergroup Yes were fearless trailblazers of a musical movement that transformed rock and completely influenced the next 15 years of popular music. Their songs had killer beats and dynamic vocals and veered more towards a pop rock progressive rather than an obscure, quirky prog like that of peers Jethro Tull. They've sold over 30 million records worldwide, and their career spans decades. They had a powerful re-emergence in the early 80s and are best remembered for their work during that period. I still think their early work is their best. Give Sweetness a listen for breezy, redolent fun. After a final album, Drama, and tour in 1980, both of which saw Jeff Downes and Trevor Horn replace Wakeman and Anderson respectively, Yes disbanded in 1981. 46. Grand Funk Railroad. Grand Funk Railroad defined heavy rock in the late 60s, but inner tensions and management issues led to their downfall. What happened? Grand Funk Railroad released its first album, On Time, in 1969. Consisting of Mark Farner, Mel Shocker, and Don Brewer, this heavy rock band formed in Flint, Michigan. The band's energetic performance at the Atlanta Pop Festival got them a record deal with Capitol Records, and they went on to record several best-selling albums over the next several years. In 1976, Grand Funk Railroad broke up over disagreements among the members and conflict with manager Terry Knight. The group subsequently reunited and released a few more albums, but they did not recapture earlier successes. The band split in 1977 and reunited in 1980, splitting again in 1983. 45. The Beach Boys. The Beach Boys captured the sun-soaked vibes of California, but family conflicts and personal struggles shattered their harmony. The Beach Boys was a family band made up of brothers Brian, Dennis, and Carl Wilson, their cousin Mike Love, and friend and neighbor Al Jardine. The band began in 1961 when Dennis and Mike went fishing and decided to try their hand at writing a song about surfing. Soon after, the group created a demo of 2 original songs, gained popularity in Southern California, and was later signed by Capitol Records. The Beach Boys' momentum continued when they were tapped to help promote the release of Mattel's Barbie dolls by singing the song Barbie. Their legend was cemented with the 1966 album Pet Sounds. Though the Beach Boys continued playing into the 70s, fractures began to form when substance use, mental health issues, and family betrayals and rivalries became more dominant in the lives of the band members. Brian and Mike's contentious relationship, as well as Dennis's association with the Manson family and eventual death by drowning in 1983, put an end to the band known for its happy-go-lucky sound and soaring harmonies. Carl Wilson died in 1998 of lung cancer. 44. Peter, Paul, and Mary.
I'm walking down that long, lonesome road, babe.
Folk music icons Peter, Paul, and Mary brought harmonies that defined the 60s, but personal pursuits led to their split. Peter Yarrow, Noel Paul Stuckey, and Mary Travers met in New York City in the early 60s after music manager Albert Grossman brought them together. According to Stuckey, the three met up in his apartment and sang the nursery rhyme "Mary Had a Little Lamb" in harmony, the only song all 3 of them knew. Their chemistry was instant, and in 1962 they released their first self-titled album, which was an immediate hit. Peter, Paul, and Mary's folk sound defined the decade, with several additional albums becoming bestsellers. The band broke up fairly amicably in 1970, with each of its members itching to pursue solo careers. That same year, Peter Yarrow was sentenced to 3 months in jail for taking indecent liberties with a 14-year-old girl, a crime he would eventually be pardoned for by President Jimmy Carter. Over the next several decades, though their solo careers did not reach the same levels of success as their combined efforts had, Peter, Paul, and Mary came back together for reunion performances. Mary Travers died in 2009 from cancer. 43. Grateful Dead.
you say your name was?
The Grateful Dead captured the counterculture spirit, but after their frontman's death, their psychedelic magic faded. How did it all end? One of the most enduring bands of the 60s, Grateful Dead resonates through the ages with their blend of psychedelic, folk rock, bluegrass, jazz, and world music. Their eclectic, inimitable style features captivating lyrical narratives and extended instrumental jams with dynamic and unexpected chords. Their bohemian, unapologetically original silhouette spawned many imitators and left a cult following in the legions of Deadheads who religiously replay the band's 10-minute jams while they tune in and zone out. Though the magic formally ended in 1995 after the death of co-founder Jerry Garcia following a string of other members' passings, Deadheads have long continued to support the surviving members and revel in the lasting legacy of the Grateful Dead and its music. 42. Steve Miller Band.
You're the cutest thing that I ever did see.
The Steve Miller Band embodied the carefree vibes of the road, but time and tragedy caught up with them. The early kings of the road, the Steve Miller Band, possessed a preternatural cool, just as comfortable rolling down Route 66 as in a dive bar in the middle of the American West. Their songs are breezy, nonchalant, and evoke a relaxed, self-possessed philosophy on life. Formed in San Francisco in the heady days of the year 1966, their suave, roady sound is best encapsulated in songs like Fly Like an Eagle and The Joker, two songs you've doubtless heard in your time. Founding member Tim Davis died from complications due to diabetes on September 20th, 1988 at the age of 44. Longtime band member Norton Buffalo died from lung cancer on October 30th, 2009. John King, drummer during the Joker era, died after a short bout with kidney cancer on October 26, 2010. James Cook died from cancer on May 16, 2011. Original bassist Lonnie Turner died from lung cancer on April 28, 2013. His time with the band led to songs such as Jet Airliner, Swingtown, Take the Money and Run, Jungle Love, and many more. Blues guitarist Jacob Peterson officially joined the band before the spring 2011 tour. Following Peterson joining the band, longtime guitarist Kenny Lee Lewis switched instruments to become the band's full-time bassist. In 2014, Steve Miller Band toured with fellow San Francisco rock band Journey. 41. Iron Butterfly. Iron Butterfly's heavy psychedelic sound defined a moment, but their volatile lineup changes spelled doom for the band. The San Diego-based group formed in 1966 when Doug Ingle, Jack Pinney, Greg Willis, and Danny Weiss played together as the house band for a club called Palace. Within the early days of the band's formation, several of the founding members were swapped out for what would become the band's most well-known lineup, consisting of Doug Ingle, Ron Bushy, Lee Dorman, and Eric Braun. The band met its greatest success with its sophomore album, Inagata da Vida, a mishearing of In the Garden of Eden. The 17-minute title track was edited down for the radio, and that version became a hit. Their second album, Ball, showed greater musical variety and went gold, but it also marked the beginning of the band's decline. Braun left the group and was replaced by guitarists Mike Pinera and Larry Rhino Reinhardt, but the band's success was largely over. Iron Butterfly broke up in 1971. Braun and Bushy reformed the group in the mid-70s without success. 40. The Doors.
Touch me, babe. Can't you see that I am not afraid?
The Doors broke boundaries with their dark, poetic rock, but frontman Jim Morrison's untimely death changed everything. Nicknamed the Kings of Acid Rock, the Doors formed in the mid-60s at UCLA when Jim Morrison and Ray Manzarek began collaborating musically. They were later joined by Robbie Krieger and John Densmore. The group began getting gigs around Los Angeles, including a residency at the illustrious venue Whiskey A Go Go, where it opened for Buffalo Springfield and other huge acts. After signing with Elektra Records, the Doors were fired from their residency when Morrison improvised on an outrageous song. But far from proving to be a setback for the group, the song instead propelled them into recording their first album and became a standard part of the band's act. As the Doors rose to fame, their disregard for authority and progressively rowdier and more irreverent stage appearances, and Morrison's several arrests, endeared them to a generation of young people defined by counterculture. The Doors' musical career was cut short in 1971 when Jim Morrison died in Paris of heart failure. Speculation over the years has suggested that Morrison's heavy substance use was the cause, but no autopsy was ever performed. He was buried in Paris's famous Père Lachaise cemetery before word got out to the public about his death. The band continued to perform for 2 years after Morrison's death, but it soon broke up without a frontman. Decades later, Manzarek and Krieger reunited along with a different lead singer and began producing music under the name The Doors of the 21st Century, provoking a legal battle between them and Densmore and Morrison's estate over the use of the name. 39. Buffalo Springfield.
1,000 people in the street singing songs.
Buffalo Springfield's folk rock sound was iconic, but constant conflict among members made their success short-lived. This short-lived but star-studded band formed in the mid-60s when Bruce Palmer and Neil Young came to Los Angeles hoping to run into Stephen Stills. After looking for him without any luck, Young and Palmer were about to leave for San Francisco when they spotted Stills with Richie Furay while stuck in traffic. After the chance encounter, they formed Buffalo Springfield soon after, with Dewey Martin completing the lineup. The group began releasing their iconic folk rock music in 1966 and found early success with hits like For What It's Worth. Buffalo Springfield hadn't been a band very long before complications began to arise. Bruce Palmer was arrested for marijuana and deported to his home country of Canada multiple times, leaving the group scrambling to find an alternate bassist. Other band members had run-ins with the police, and tensions were climbing between Stephen Stills and Neil Young, the latter who was frequently not participating in the band. Eventually, Young left to pursue his own music and the rest of the band broke up, leading Stills to start Crosby, Stills and Nash, a group which Young would later join. Bruce Palmer and Dewey Martin died in the 2000s. 38. The Belmonts.
Well, if you want to make me cry, that won't be so hard.
The Belmonts were kings of doo-wop, but their sound was overshadowed by changing musical trends and internal departures. Ah, sweet, sweet nostalgia. Dion and the Belmonts are another quaint, delightful act from the early part of the 60s, and their sounds are more high school bop circa 1957 than looting and rioting 1967. And I love them for it. They are the kings of innocent, sentimental doo-wop, and their songs just beg to be listened to while mending a wounded heart, or after being stood up on a date. They hailed from Belmont, known as the Little Italy of New York, and their music captured the lonesomeness and exuberance of growing up in mid-century America. In 1961, DiMucci left the group for a solo career. The Belmonts continued on without him and recorded into the 1960s, having several modest hits. The group continued recording, with many personnel changes well into the 1990s, and even had several reunion concerts and albums with DiMucci, although he never officially rejoined the group. 37. King Crimson.
Friend, charity.
King Crimson's eclectic, boundary-pushing sound captivated a loyal fan base, but constant member changes led to their disbandment. British progressive rocker sleeper hit King Crimson is best known today for their curiously passionate cult following. They could best be described as eclectic, borrowing themes and musical motifs from classical, folk, new wave, industrial, and jazz genres. They were unapologetically weird and irreverent, and it was damn near impossible then and now to put them in a box. If you are a new fan, prepare for a trippy, unprecedented ride. Their vigorously experimental 1969 album, The Court of the Crimson King, is a full-on experience for the uninitiated. In the early 1970s, during the band's massively creative period, inner turmoil among band members emerged, centering largely on the group's musical direction and the rigors of the touring schedule. As a consequence, the band was constantly in flux, with players rotating in and out of the lineup. Robert Fripp was the only constant. As its musicians changed, King Crimson added other musical styles to its soundscape. In 1974, with no other albums even coming close to the popularity of In the Court of the Crimson King, Fripp decided to dissolve the band. 36. The Byrds.
I don't care what they may say. I don't care what they may.
The Byrds were folk rock pioneers, but internal strife and changing musical directions caused their downfall. The Byrds formed in Los Angeles in 1964 and included members Jim Roger McGuinn, Gene Clark, David Crosby, Chris Hillman, and Michael Clark. The band pioneered the folk rock genre with covers like Mr. Tambourine Man and Turn, 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 but the group's sound shifted toward the popular psychedelic rock, causing rifts in the band that would lead Clark, and Crosby to leave voluntarily or be fired a few years later. Despite the departures of three key band members, the Byrds continued to produce hits, including the album The Notorious Byrd Brothers well into the early 70s. In 1973, the group disbanded, though reunions continued up until 2000. Both Clark and Clark died in the early 90s, followed by Crosby. 35. The Mamas and the Papas. The Mamas and the Papas harmonies defined the 60s, but behind the scenes, their story was filled with scandal. The Mamas and the Papas formed in 1965 when John and Michelle Phillips, Denny Doherty, and Cass Elliot came together in Los Angeles. John and Michelle were married, and Denny Doherty and Cass Elliot joined the musical group later. The group's first hit, California Dreamin', launched them to prominence in the folk pop scene, but the group was not destined for a long run due to a string of messy infidelities and unrequited affection. The band dissolved by 1969 after John engaged in unfaithful and abusive behavior, Michelle and Denny began an affair, and Cass fell for Doherty, a feeling that was not reciprocated. Cass died in 1974 of heart failure, which temporarily reunited the remaining band members. Both men of the group have since died, leaving Michelle as the only remaining group member. She went on to have a career in acting and has revealed much of the band's dark history in her memoir and in interviews. 34. Pink Floyd. Pink Floyd became rock legends, but internal tensions and creative differences ripped the band apart in the end. The legendary British rock band Pink Floyd formed in London when Roger Waters, Nick Mason, and Richard Wright happened to meet while studying architecture at university in the 60s. The three started playing together and were joined by Waters' childhood friend, Syd Barrett. By 1967, the group had been signed to a label, but Barrett's mental health was suffering, and Pink Floyd recruited a new guitarist as his replacement, David Gilmour. By the late 60s and early 70s, the band was beginning to hit its stride, releasing successful albums including Atom Heart Mother and Metal. The Dark Side of the Moon, however, redefined what success would look like for not only this band, but for rock bands in general from that point forward. By the end of the 70s, goodwill amongst the members of Pink Floyd was beginning to run out. Tensions between Roger Waters, who composed most of the band's music, and the other band members were high. Richard Wright left the band, and Waters became increasingly alienated from the remaining group members as he tried to retain control. By the 80s, there was an ugly split, with Waters departing the group and the other members attempting to keep it going. Following legal battles over the other members' continued use of the Pink Floyd name, the group returned to platinum sales without Waters. 33. Deep Purple.
Come, see you here, do this every night. When the dawn comes crashing.
Deep Purple's explosive sound shook the rock world, but member conflicts and constant changes led to their disbandment. British group Deep Purple are another one of those great 60s bands that I consider purest rock and roll pioneers. They explored dynamic new ground with hallucinatory, otherworldly instrumentals and enigmatic melodies, but they were classic rockers through and through. Their 60s sound was decidedly progressive, but they got harder and more rebellious in style with their 70s masterpiece, Deep Purple in Rock. Listen, Learn, Read On, and Hush are mesmerizing material and make for perfect summer driving music. Or when you want to get deep and think about the meaning of it all, man. The last show on the tour was on March 15, 1976 at the Liverpool Empire Theatre. The breakup was finally made public in July 1976 when then-manager Rob Cooksey issued this statement. The band will not record or perform together as Deep Purple again. 32. Them.
Can I accept the fact she's chosen him and simply let them be?
Them was a bluesy rock band that launched Van Morrison's career, but infighting and disagreements splintered them early on. Belfast legends Them might be unfamiliar to the uninitiated, but you definitely know their lead act, Van Morrison, for his masterful contribution to 20th century musical culture. Their blues rock garage sound reached a peak with the jangly Americana leather jacket and motorcycle anthem, Baby Please Don't Go, and their radio-friendly anthem, Gloria. While the band's tenure with Van Morrison was short-lived, they had an outsized impact, influencing both the Irish music scene and inspiring contemporaries like The Doors. Them went on to headline at the Fillmore in San Francisco, California, and then to Hawaii, where disputes erupted among band members and management over money. The band broke apart, Morrison and Henderson returning to Belfast, while Ray Elliott, born Raymond Elliott, January 23, 1939 in Belfast, Co-Antrim, Northern Ireland, and David Harvey, born David Tufney, July 29, 1943 in Bude, Cornwall, decided to stay in America. 31. Chicago.
Hold me now. It's hard for me to say I'm sorry.
Chicago's brass rock sound made waves in the 60s and 70s, but tragedy struck when one of their founding members died. Originally called the Big Thing, Chicago Transit Authority formed out of its namesake city in the late 60s. They later shortened the name to Chicago with an original lineup featuring Peter Cetera, Lee Lugane, Terry Kath, Robert Lamb, Walter Parazader, James Pankow, and Danny Seraphine. The band later moved out to Los Angeles where they got off to a big start opening for Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix. Really hitting its stride in the 70s, Chicago lasted a decade with its original lineup before the tragic death of Terry Kath in 1978 forced the band to reevaluate. The band remained together, charting platinum successes in the 80s and still tours today with a much changed lineup. 30. Jefferson Airplane. Jefferson Airplane soared high in the psychedelic rock scene, but drug use and personal conflicts led to their split. Psychedelic rock group Jefferson Airplane started in San Francisco in 1965 when musician Marty Ballin bought a nightclub called The Matrix and assembled a house band. Lead singer Ballin, along with Paul Kantner, Grace Slick, Jorma Kokkonen, Spencer Dryden, and Jack Cassidy, quickly rose to stardom with songs like White Rabbit and Somebody to Love. Jefferson Airplane played Woodstock in 1969, but as it became more experimental with its sound in the early 70s, the band lost some of its early commercial success. The band ultimately split in 1972 after differing creative visions and substance use pulled the band members apart. Several members went on to form an offshoot group called Jefferson Starship, while the remaining 2 members stuck together and created a band called Hot Tuna. The original Jefferson Airplane was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1996. Spencer Dryden, Marty Ballin, Paul Kantner, and several other short-term members have since passed away. 29. Santana. Santana revolutionized rock with Latin influences, but inner turmoil and shifting musical directions reshaped the band's future. Formed in 1966 by Mexican guitarist Carlos Santana, the band simply named Santana navigated some initial roadblocks, including getting fired for being late, a health scare, and several iterations of players before settling on a lineup that drove the band to stardom. Santana played Woodstock in 1969 and recorded several successful albums by the late 60s and early 70s, bringing Latin rock into the mainstream. In the early 70s, Carlos Santana's musical vision moved increasingly towards jazz and avant-garde fusion and away from the commercially successful rock tunes the band had found early success with. Santana wouldn't fully return to the spotlight until the turn of the 2000s with the multi-platinum Supernatural. Today, Carlos Santana still performs, albeit with a frequently changing lineup of players. 28. The Supremes. The Supremes ruled Motown with their unmatched harmonies, but behind the glitz, rivalries and departures threatened their reign. The Supremes were, are, and always will be the queens of Motown. Diana Ross became an icon in her own right, but her work with the Supremes was her best and hit all the right soaring, lively, melancholic notes. They had 12 #1 singles on the Billboard charts that still get plenty of well-deserved airtime to this day. Their catchy, harmonic, soulful sounds elevated songs about heartache, jealousy, and loss to beautiful, timeless effect. In 1970, Ross left to pursue a solo career and was replaced by Gene Terrell, and the group reverted the name to the Supremes again. During the mid-1970s, the lineup continued to change, with Linda Lawrence, Sherry Payne, and Susie Green joining until the group, after 18 years from its foundation, disbanded in 1977. 27. Steppenwolf. Steppenwolf's anthems define the counterculture, but their rebellious spirit was not enough to keep them together for long. Calling all you wild hearts and rebels with a cause, Steppenwolf is your 60s musical spirit animal. You surely know their song Born to Be Wild, but did you know that they sold more than 25 million albums during their short careers? Their star rose when their music was featured in the countercultural cult classic film Easy Rider, 1969, which lent a cinematic, open-road aesthetic to their trippy, unbridled musical offerings. Their 1969 album Monster was heavily critical of the Vietnam War, solidifying their reputation as social renegades with a powerful message. After 50 years of performing, Steppenwolf played its final show in October 2018, and John Kay, founder, vocalist, and primary songwriter of Steppenwolf, has returned to his early musical days and will perform solo. 26. The Kinks. The Kinks were British invasion darlings with an unmistakable sound, but internal disputes slowly tore the group apart. Part of the British invasion that upended all expectations and norms up to that date, the Kinks have had 9 albums hit the top 40 charts and are one of the most talented groups of the 60s. So British they would make the Queen blush, the Kinks were sensual, playful, melancholy, and sustained by an inimitable exuberance. Sounds contradictory? Give Waterloo Sunset, Lola, and All Day and All of the Night a listen to get to the heart of their unadulterated dynamism. They have sold over 50 million albums during their tenure, and they capture the romantic, untamed hearts of the 60s mod movement. The Kinks didn't split up at their peak like the Beatles, 1970. They didn't carry on forever like the Rolling Stones, who are still going now without ever having an official breakup in their career. Instead, despite Pete Quaife and then Mick Avery's departures and massively declining sales, the Kinks continued with Ray and Dave in place. They got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1990 and continued into the mid-90s, where the background of Britpop meant they were enjoying some well-earned appreciation from the current generation. The love from famous fans didn't seem to boost their commercial appeal, unfortunately. Their 24th and final studio album was 1993's Phobia, and the Kinks played together for the last time in 1996, with Ray and Dave then going on to do their own thing. 25. The Monkees.
Well, now you know how happy I can be.
The Monkees were a manufactured pop sensation turned real band, but internal conflicts and industry pressures drove them apart. The Monkees formed in 1966, not from 4 musicians organically trying to form a band, but rather as 4 musician actors on the set of a sitcom. The show, also titled The Monkees, was a Hollywood experiment in creating the perfect 60s pop band. The studio auditioned hundreds of prospective musician actors, including Stephen Stills, before casting Mickey Dolenz, Michael Nesmith, Peter Tork, and Davy Jones as a band on the TV show. The program was a hit, and so was the music produced by the Monkees and the show's songwriters. What began as a fictional band soon became real. However, the Monkees landed hits like Daydream Believer and I'm a Believer and took on a life beyond the show. Conflicts over the real members of the Monkees not being allowed to actually play on their recordings or write their music came to a head in the late 60s, and the band eventually won control over their own material. By then, however, several band members had lost interest in the project and were moving on to solo work. In 1968, the creators of the Monkees sitcom made the satirical movie Head, which featured the Monkees in a bizarre series of misadventures. The film signified the end of the band's career as a Hollywood invention meant for teens. 24. The Moody Blues.
Yes, I love you.
The Moody Blues captured the psychedelic vibe of the 60s, but constant shifts in lineup caused turbulence throughout their career. This British rock band came together in 1964 and was composed of Mike Pinder, Ray Thomas, Clint Warwick, Graham Edge, and Denny Lane under the name M&B 5, which would eventually become the Moody Blues. Lane and Warwick left in '66 and were replaced by John Lodge and Justin Hayward. Over the decade the group was together, it produced several highly successful psychedelic rock albums, including In Search of the Lost Chord, On the Threshold of a Dream, and A Question of Balance. The band parted ways in 1974, but reunited a number of times over roughly 50 years. Edge and Thomas died within a few years of each other. Then, John Lodge and Justin Hayward continued performing as solo artists. There was some disagreement, however, over whether to continue touring as the Moody Blues. 23. The Yardbirds. The Yardbirds was a breeding ground for future rock legends, but creative differences led to their inevitable collapse. London legends the Yardbirds approached Brit rock with a prep school sensibility, a dash of elegant aloofness, and a sensual analog garage rock. But you might not know the full scope of the Yardbirds' mastery. They were early, often unsung pioneers of psychedelic rock, and they made vast contributions to the technical repertoire of the electric guitar. Nothing makes you want to be a mod trawling the streets of 60s Chelsea than Heartful of Soul or For Your Love. When Beck left in 1967, Page naturally took the reins. Or he tried to anyway. The band's management called in a ringer, a renowned pop producer named Mickey Most, to help pilot the Yardbirds back to chart dominance. But when the time came to record, Most's instincts ultimately failed him. Page could see the future and wanted to record heavier, twisted material, songs like Dazed and Confused. Most forced them to lay down treacly pop compositions like Ha Ha Said the Clown instead. The results were obvious. The final epitaph for the Yardbirds was best summarized in a 1970 essay written by one of their most ardent acolytes, rock critic Lester Bangs. The Yardbirds, for all their greatness, would finally fizzle out in an eclectic morass of confused experiments and bad judgments, he wrote. 22. The Miracles. The Miracles were a Motown powerhouse led by Smokey Robinson's iconic voice, but their time in the spotlight was fleeting. Smokey Robinson surely has one of the most engaging, infectious, delightful voices of all time, with a range that would make most of us green with envy. The Miracles were one of the foundational bands in the Motown musical movement that grew out of African American communities in Detroit. In many ways, Motown is the defining genre of the early 60s and is sometimes unjustifiably eclipsed by the later rise of British rock and San Francisco hippie folk. Their music was packed with punchy lyrics, a spirited optimism, and a heartfelt pathos at every turn. The group failed to have a hit during their short Columbia run, and in 1978, Pete Moore decided to retire from the road while Billy Griffin wanted to return to his solo career, leading the group to disband. 21. Genesis. Genesis's lush, immersive sound captivated fans, but over time, health issues and creative differences forced the band to end. British progressive rock legends Genesis got their start in the creative melting pot of late 60s Surrey. While they are best known for their 1970s lineup featuring Phil Collins and Peter Gabriel, their 1969 debut, From Genesis to Revelation, already demonstrated their atmospheric, fully immersive soundscapes to the world. When I think of Genesis, I think of a full-body experience. Every instrument is activated to its highest powers, and there is always a strange suggestion of an echo chamber in their generous, complex vocals. In the Beginning is a great intro to their spacey, early sound. On March 26, 2022, Genesis held their final concert at London's O2 Arena and split up shortly after due to Phil's health concerns. I don't think there's anything else left. The well is dry, Tony Banks shared with Vulture. We can't tour anymore because of Phil's state, so that's the end of that. 20. Led Zeppelin.
The girl who won my heart. Now she's only 4 years old, but it's a real vibe.
Led Zeppelin redefined rock with their heavy sound and mystique. but the tragic death of their drummer ended their journey. Formed in 1968, British rock band Led Zeppelin came to be when Jimmy Page, freshly solo from the implosion of his former band the Yardbirds, started to gather musicians to form a new group. With singer Robert Plant, John Bonham, and John Paul Jones, Page launched the new Yardbirds, but after a rebrand, the group released its first album in 1969 as Led Zeppelin while on tour. The album was an immediate success and established the band as a defining group of the following decade. After a little over a decade of success and 8 studio albums, the band broke up in 1980 after drummer John Bonham died unexpectedly. The band had been about to embark on a tour, but ultimately decided the group was incomplete without its original drummer and disbanded. Robert Plant launched a successful solo career beginning in 1982, and the other band members continued their own musical projects. 19. The Temptations.
And I look into your eyes, a reflection of a face I see.
The Temptations had soul and style, but numerous lineup changes and personal struggles marked their long career. The Temptations formed in Detroit in 1961 and were signed by Motown. The group consisted of Otis Williams, Melvin Franklin, Eddie Kendricks, Paul Williams, David Ruffin, and Dennis Edwards. The band quickly made waves with its perfectly balanced harmonies and soul sound and scored a number of hits, including Ain't Too Proud to Beg, Get Ready, My Girl, Papa Was a Rolling Stone, and I Wish It Would Rain. By the late 70s, some members of the Temptations were beginning to leave, and the band switched labels from Motown Records over to Atlantic while trying to shift their sound to appeal to the burgeoning disco craze. The group stayed together, though the lineup changed considerably over the 80s. In the early 90s, Ruffin, Kendricks, and Franklin all tragically died within a couple of years of each other. Today, Otis Williams, who owns the Temptations name, still performs with a new lineup. 18. The Four Seasons.
Oh, how you tried to cut me down to size, telling dirty lies.
The Four Seasons doo-wop hits ruled the airwaves, but changing tastes and personal challenges dimmed their bright star. I told you doo-wop was major news in the early 60s, and the Four Seasons is just another example of the well-deep soul and vocal dynamism of the movement. The Four Seasons created music that was warm, enticing, and nostalgic in turn, with an innocent affect that was scarcely seen again after 1965. Their lead, Frankie Valli, was a throwback from the Grease-style 50s when teens went on dates at car hops and getting to second base was earth-shattering news. I love the soft, hopeful, earnest sounds of doo-wop, and I think the Four Seasons are one of the most enduring examples of a genre that definitely needs a reboot. While new hits for the Four Seasons had dried up in the first half of the 70s, the band never lost its popularity as a performing act. Longtime member Joe Long stayed in the group until 1975. Over the course of the 70s, Valli and Guadio would begin assembling a new lineup. 17. Traffic. Traffic's jazzy rock sound set them apart, but constant reformation and side projects saw the band drift apart. Birmingham rockers Traffic were formed by Steve Winwood of later Higher Love fame. They began their musical journey as a psychedelic rock group, but they experimented widely with unusual instruments and chords, including the harpsichord, sitar, reed instruments, and keyboards. The result was a sound akin to a relaxed, pensive jam session, tinged with jazz elements and unexpected instrumental undertones. Their aesthetic of stylishly mussed hair and world traveler accoutrements fit the time and place to a T. Traffic disbanded at the beginning of 1969 when Steve Winwood co-formed the supergroup Blind Faith. An album compiled from studio and live recordings, Last Exit, was released in 1969. 16. Jethro Tull.
He pacified the nappy suffering.
Jethro Tull's quirky progressive rock was revolutionary, but as times changed, so did their creative direction and focus. So progressive that it hurts, Jethro Tull were the kooky, unapologetic, eminently whimsical group of the 60s that the hippie world needed. They helped put the revolutionary genre of prog on the map, influencing the genre with their bizarre literary allusions and unorthodox instrumental tangents. Jethro Tull was sometimes frenzied, sometimes languorous, but always intense, thought-provoking, and creatively avant-garde. Give Aqualung or The Witch's Promise a listen for a weird, immersive musical journey. The band ceased studio recording activity in the 2000s, but continued to tour until splitting in 2011. Following the band's split, Anderson and Barr continued to record and tour as solo artists, with Anderson's band billed variously as both Jethro Tull and Ian Anderson solo. 15. The Rolling Stones.
Standing in line with your friend Jimmy, a man.
The Rolling Stones defined rock and roll rebellion, but personal and legal troubles shadowed their long and storied career. This influential British rock band was founded in 1961 by Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, who had gone to primary school together. Jagger and Richards met Brian Jones and Ian Stewart in 1962, and this group took its name from one of their greatest musical inspirations, Muddy Waters, and more specifically their tune Rollin' Stone. After Bill Wyman and Charlie Watts joined in '63, the band began producing hits in earnest through the 60s and reached the peak of their fame by the end of that decade. The band roared into the 70s amid their most important run of albums. The Rolling Stones are still together and performing today, despite many changes in their lineup and the loss of former members. Mick Jagger and Keith Richards continue to front the band. Charlie Watts, one of the early members, played with the Stones for decades before dying in 2021. 14. The Association.
Every time I think that I'm the only one who's gonna be someone calls on me.
The Association's sunny pop tunes were loved by many, but frequent lineup changes made it difficult to sustain their success. The Sunshine pop group The Association formed in Los Angeles in 1965. Its initial lineup of 6 members included Jules Alexander, Terry Kirkman, Ted Bluchel Jr., Brian Cole, Russ Giguere, and Jim Yester. Though all the band members played instruments, they were set apart by the fact that they were all also vocalists and frequently switched off singing the lead. Hit songs included Never My Love and Along Comes Mary. Band members came and went as the 70s wore on, with original members of the Association swapping out with new members, only to occasionally return. The band is still performing today with Jules Alexander and Jim Yester as the only remaining founding members. 13. Fleetwood Mac.
Crystal vision.
Fleetwood Mac's early blues sound evolved into pop rock mastery, but lineup changes and drama followed them throughout their career. Most of us are ardent fans of 70s Fleetwood Mac, but did you know their early iteration formed in 1967 and had a more experimental, less pop-focused sound? They started off as a blues band with absolutely killer guitar chords and an impressive stage charisma. Moody hits like Oh Well and rollicking purist classic rock gems like Green Manalishi are often eclipsed by their later repertoire, dominated by the spirited vocals of Stevie Nicks, but I guarantee a listen will expand your horizons and allow you to more further appreciate how much ground they broke as a musical act. In June 2022, Christine McVie told Rolling Stone that Fleetwood Mac kind of broke up following that last tour of nearly 100 shows. If they were to reunite, she wanted estranged bandmate Buckingham to join them, but Christine had said her health wasn't good enough for a farewell tour anyway. Christine died 5 months later after suffering a stroke. Ahead of the 2023 Grammys, Fleetwood said the band is likely no more. 12. Vanilla Fudge. Vanilla Fudge's slow, heavy covers of pop hits gained a cult following, but changes in the music scene outpaced them. Vanilla Fudge, a great band name and even greater rock band. They are best known for slow arrangements of contemporary hit songs, like their seductive and evocative heavy and brooding cover of You Keep Me Hanging On, one of the Supremes' biggest hits of the early decade. Vanilla Fudge were off doing their own thing most of the time, performing for the love of musical arrangements and technical wizardry, and they achieved a loyal fan base without all the frills and showmanship. They paid homage to psychedelic motifs and even dabbled in some inchoate heavy metal sampling further into their careers. The band's original lineup was vocalist-organist Mark Stein, bassist-vocalist Tim Bogert, guitarist-vocalist Vince Martell, and drummer-vocalist Carmine Appice. They recorded 5 albums during the years 1967 to 69 before disbanding in 1970. 11. 10 Years After.
Rock your mama, rock your river, rock your mind.
10 Years After brought folk rock to new heights, but a lack of commercial success and member losses slowed them down. The unsung folk music group from the 60s, the legendary 10 Years After, don't get the hype they deserve, despite releasing unequivocal gems like A Space in Time. They created something of a sensuous brand of folk with dreamy melodies and a carnal, unadulterated humanism. Their songs captured the intoxicating minimalism of the age when wild trips and back-to-the-land ethics combined to create a subculture that was completely exploratory. Songs like Here They Come and I'd Love to Change the World capture their alluring, honeyed vocals and politically unbridled energy. Alvin Lee continued to play and record on his own until his death in 2013 following surgery to correct an irregular heartbeat. Bassist Leo Lyons left in 2014 and 10 Years After continues to tour today with Rick Lee and Chick Churchill as the only original members remaining. 10. Crosby, Stills and Nash.
Their father's hell did slowly go by.
Crosby, Stills and Nash were the ultimate supergroup, but egos and personal conflicts made their union difficult to sustain. The musicians who would go on to form the supergroup Crosby, Stills and Nash, or CSN, in 1968 were already stars in their own right by the time the late 60s rolled around. David Crosby played with the popular group The Byrds but was fired. Stephen Stills was in Buffalo Springfield, but the band had broken up shortly before, and Graham Nash played with the Hollies. After the three played casually together at a party in LA and found that they had instant musical chemistry, Nash quit the Hollies and Crosby, Stills and Nash was born. They released their first self-titled album in 1969 and were an immediate success, known for their tight harmonies. In 1970, they were joined by a fourth member, Neil Young, who had played with Stills in Buffalo Springfield. Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young split up and reformed, often in different variations of the group, multiple times over the course of the following decades, last splitting in 2016. The band has become known for its continuous interpersonal conflicts caused by ego battles, substance use, rivalry, and fights over women. David Crosby died in early 2023. 9. The Eagles.
They will never forget you till somebody new comes along.
The Eagles captured the sound of the American West, but internal strife and the death of a founding member shook the band. The Eagles, perhaps more than any band in history, capture the wide-open skies and road trip sensibility of the American West, and their sounds resonate in small-town bars across the world to this day. No one does lonesome, wistful, affected ballads like the Eagles, as evidenced in their tear-jerking gems Tequila Sunrise and Desperado. But before you go get a tissue, I guarantee that their unadulterated restless spirit translated just as well into songs of breezy cynicism and optimistic insouciance. Only masters could flawlessly switch from sardonic, dreamy hits like Hotel California to the sensual One of These Nights to cheery anthems like Take It Easy. Following Fry's death in January 2016, the Eagles reformed in 2017 with Glenn's son Deacon Fry and country singer Vince Gill sharing lead vocals for Fry's songs. Deacon Fry left the band in 2022 but returned the next year to participate in the band's ongoing final tour. Meisner died in 2023. 8. The Allman Brothers Band. The Allman Brothers were Southern rock pioneers, but after their leader's death, they struggled to keep their spirit alive. Classic rock to the heart and soul, these icons were pioneers of the Southern rock genre that exploded during the late 60s and retained its hold on the American imagination until at least the mid-80s. Their jam band style live shows featured an affable medley of country, blues, and a healthy hit of improvised instrumental bridges. The leader of the pack, Duane Allman, was tragically killed in that most rock and roll of accidents, a motorcycle crash, and his 1971 passing inspired the rest of the band to honor his memory for the remainder of the 70s. The band retired for good in October 2014 after the final show at the Beacon Theater. Butch Trucks died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound on January 24, 2017 in West Palm Beach, Florida at the age of 69. 7. Nitty Gritty Dirt Band.
He clicked his heels. He let go of a laugh.
The Nitty Gritty Dirt Band brought country rock to the masses, but after decades of playing, they're finally calling it quits. Nitty Gritty Dirt Band got their start the good old-fashioned rockabilly way. They wanted to figure out how not to have to work for a living. Their legacy endures to this day, and they continue to perform to legions of fans with their country rock sound. You've definitely heard their music at a small-town pool hall or a family backyard barbecue. They are something of a staple of Americana, and they are iconic figures in the country community. The Nitty Gritty Dirt Band is saying goodbye to the road with their upcoming All the Good Times, the farewell tour, launched March 21st. 6. Canned Heat.
Oh, daddy cry.
Canned Heat were festival favorites with a bluesy vibe, but tragic losses and lineup changes took their toll on the band. You may have heard their iconic hit Going Up the Country, and if you've been to any small town bar in the American heartland, then you almost certainly have. They were California bluesy rockers in heart, mind, and spirit, capturing the adventurousness and happy defiance of the age. They were staples of the late 60s festival circuit nationwide, and they were renowned for their cheerful, fast-paced instrumentals and occasional tangential psychedelic solos. The band still exists, but with none of the members who played on their first album in 1967. Sadly, all the members who played on that album are deceased now. Alan Blind Owl Wilson died in 1970, Bob Haidt died in 1981, Harry Vestine died in 1997, Larry Taylor died in 2019, and Frank Cook died in 2021. 5. Simon and Garfunkel.
No one dare disturb the sound.
Simon and Garfunkel's harmonies were flawless, but a rocky relationship and growing rivalry between the duo split them apart. Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel met as grade schoolers in Queens, New York in the early 50s and began working on music together as teens. They began recording under the name Tom and Jerry when they were 15, scoring a surprise hit with Hey Schoolgirl. By the early 60s, both Simon and Garfunkel were attending college while still playing music. The duo got a record deal with Columbia and became Simon and Garfunkel in 1963, and in '64 they released their first album, Wednesday Morning 3 a.m. Animosity between the two had already begun by then. Despite this, the two released several successful albums during the 60s and were further boosted by the featuring of their music in the hit film The Graduate. After Bridge Over Troubled Water, their most successful album was released in 1970, the two parted ways. Simon, the songwriter of the duo, was offered solo projects and had success as a solo artist. Garfunkel, meanwhile, was the primary singer, which may have garnered him more attention from fans. The snowballing rivalry between the pair, mostly over recognition, jealousy, and control over the group, ultimately drove them apart. Though they've reunited for a few live performances, they have not produced any more studio albums together. 4. Blind Faith. Blind Faith was a supergroup with an impressive lineup, but internal tensions and controversies doomed them from the start. In 1969, the dissolution of the bands Cream and Traffic led to the formation of Blind Faith, a British supergroup featuring Eric Clapton, Ginger Baker, Steve Winwood, and Rick Gretsch. To call the band short-lived would be an understatement. It lasted less than a year, in which time the group released one album. That album, also called Blind Faith, was a massive success, topping charts in both the US and the UK. According to Winwood, the band was doomed from the start due to Ginger Baker's erratic and sometimes violent behavior. The album cover also presented problems for the band, as it featured a photo of a topless 11-year-old girl, Mariora Goshen, sparking controversy. Goshen later reported that she was coerced into taking the photo. Shortly after Blind Faith formed, the band broke up, with its members going on to work on other projects. 3. Cream. Cream were pioneers of psychedelic rock, but their fiery personalities and constant clashes led to their breakup. Deep, dirty hard rock met its match in the virtuosos of 60s guitar, Cream. Cream is a staple of stoner dens and psychedelic afternoons then and now due to their completely immersive, unapologetic instrumental density and textured beats. There is something languorous and nonchalant about their tunes, perfect for musings about infinity and the origins of the universe. Cream is considered one of the world's first supergroups and launched the notable careers of Eric Clapton, Ginger Baker, and Jack Bruce. In an interview with BBC Six Music in April 2010, Bruce confirmed that there would be no more Cream shows, stating simply, "Cream is over." Bruce died on October 25th, 2014, and Baker died on October 6th, 2019, leaving Clapton as the last surviving member. 2. The Righteous Brothers. The Righteous Brothers gave us some of the most beautiful duets in rock history, but time and loss reshaped their legacy. The humble, earnest, and vocally complex kings of early 60s blue-eyed soul, you probably know their beautiful lamentation, Unchained Melody, one of the best heartsick songs of all time. Their duets were uncommonly beautiful, pairing Bill Medley's bass baritone and Bobby Hatfield's tenor. Did you know that You've Lost That Loving Feeling was the most played radio track of the entire 20th century? In 2016, Medley reformed the Righteous Brothers with Bucky Hurd, and they continue to perform as a duo. Even though Medley still enjoys performing at 83, he is ready to enjoy semi-retirement and is embarking on the Thank You Farewell tour with vocalist Bucky Hurd, who has been sharing the stage with him since 2003. 1. The Beatles. The Beatles are the most influential band in history, but internal strife and tragic losses ended the dream too soon. Paul McCartney, John Lennon, and George Harrison formed what would become one of the most influential music groups of all time in Liverpool in 1958, trying out several drummers, most prominently Pete Best, before landing on Ringo's Starr in 1962. The Beatles gained popularity quickly, recording hit singles in the early 60s like Please Please Me and playing around the UK before booking a pivotal gig on Ed Sullivan's American Variety program, a performance that would introduce them to US audiences and begin the era of Beatlemania across the world. Between 1963 and 1970, the Beatles released around a dozen best-selling albums, cementing their pop legacy. By the late 60s, the Beatles' relationships were becoming strained and seismic changes were underway. Brian Epstein, the band's beloved manager, died of a drug overdose in 1967, and John Lennon's relationship with Yoko Ono, the latter who's received unfair blame for breaking up the band, was starting to flourish. Mostly, the priorities, attitudes, and creative desires of the four members were shifting in many directions. By 1970, irreconcilable differences led the band members to part ways. A decade later, Lennon was shot and killed by Mark David Chapman outside his apartment building, and George Harrison died of lung cancer in 2001. Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr have had successful music careers of their own since the band's disbandment. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video, smash that like button and subscribe for more music nostalgia. Don't stop here. Check out our other videos for more deep dives into rock history. Keep the music alive and see you in the next video.